Hello, my name is John Ryan from the University of Western Australia. It was a privilege to participate in the online conference held earlier in 2016 by the Environmental Humanities Center at UC Santa Barbara. So my thanks to the organizers for this second opportunity to join in. I'll be talking about imagining plant-like futures, vegetal intelligence in Brian Aldiss's Hothouse. In its analysis of 13,000 plant species worldwide, the International Union for Conservation of Nature calculated a 68% rate of critical endangerment. Other estimates, such as the State of the World's Plants report by Kew Gardens, suggest that 20 to 25% of the world's plants are threatened with extinction. When we consider the profound interconnections between plants and humanity through food, drink, medicine, fiber, elemental exchange, cultural heritage, and spiritual sustenance, these become especially harrowing statistics. Shown here in the slide is the yellow and purple lady slipper, an extremely rare orchid that exists only in one golf course in England and has been under police protection since 1917, a privilege most likely not enjoyed by the vast majority of the world's endangered species. How might we imagine humanity in 2050 as more plant-like, as in higher synchronization with vegetal being in our scientific, technological, cultural, and interpersonal pursuits? Perhaps the world in 2050 will be committed to halting plant loss, bringing species frozen in seed banks back to life, and valuing the botanical heritage of the earth. Perhaps it will be a world in which countries enact laws protecting plants and granting them moral standing. A world in which plant research at educational or governmental institutions requires ethical clearance. A post-petroleum world energized by highly efficient and quiet renewable photovoltaic sources. A world that increasingly greens its cities, as in the Beirut Wonder Forest shown here, as a counterforce to exponentially growing urban populations. Or would the plant-like future involve a metaphysical shift towards vegetal forms of being and becoming that would transform culture and society at a fundamental level? And how can the genre of science fiction enable us to build up the imaginative faculties required for breaking down the ontologies that divide humans from flora, fauna, and fungi? In approaching these latter questions, I look towards Brian Aldiss's vision of a vegetal future in his 1962 novel Hothouse. In Aldiss's narrative, humans grapple with the threat of their extinction by seeking refuge in the canopy of an immense banyan tree. Intelligent forms of plant life, including giant spider-like traversers, superbirds, whistle thistles, belly elms, wilt milts, and others with equally intriguing names, have come to preside over the earth, one side of which perpetually faces the sun. And Aldiss opens the novel with this statement: obeying an inalienable law, things grew, growing riotous and strange in their impulse for growth. It was no longer a place for mind. It was a place for growth, for vegetables. It was like a hothouse. After the techno-industrial collapse of human society, monstrous vegetal creatures pushed tribal groups to the hostile margins between day and night. As Aldiss later tells us, quote, they had finally triumphed. The vegetables had triumphed as much by weight of numbers as by inventiveness. Time and again they succeeded simply by imitating some device used long ago, perhaps on a smaller scale, in the animal kingdom, end quote. Yet in Hothouse, these monstrous plant creatures occupy an ambiguous ontological terrain that I think is indicative of contemporary Western society's somewhat dysfunctional, if I may, approach to the vegetal world. Aldiss's plants are intentional and inventive, yet imitative of animals, percipient yet consumed by the same mindless overproliferation that beleaguered humanity before its collapse. The question of future in flora is timely. The last 5 years have seen a growth in plant studies from cultural, literary, and philosophical perspectives. Scientific research into plant signaling and behavior has supplied a catalyst for reevaluating plants and our relationships to them. In Through Vegetal Being, 2016, published just this year, written as a dialogue with French philosopher Lucia Irigaray, Michael Marder asserts that, quote, by robbing plants of their time, and especially of their future, we deny a future to human and all other living beings. For Marder, an alignment between human beings and vegetal temporality may lead to a societal order with increasingly plant-like attributes. A vegetal future involves a revitalized temporal sense and an experience of time located in place that, quote, does not hasten to transport me to the past or to the future beyond the current horizon. The closest analogy to this experience, perhaps, is the feeling of one's own body, feeling oneself feel. For Marder, the future is embodied in placement that resists the entrenched psychological divisions between past, present, and future. More specifically, Marder sees a paradigm for human empowerment within the non-extractive photosynthetic mode of being, and he goes on to say, that is still another lesson, another vegetal lesson to be learned. How to energize oneself following the plants without annihilating the sources of our vitality. In a similar vein, in an essay from 1989, the ethnobotanist and psychonaut Terence McKenna proposed the heuristic plant-planet, positioning the botanical kingdom as the creative matrix for the 21st century. And McKenna says, I propose that we should adopt the plant as the organizational model for life in the 21st century, just as the computer seems to be the dominant mental social model of the late 20th century, and the steam engine was the guiding image of the 19th century. McKenna concludes the article by articulating some of the lessons, both physical and metaphysical, of vegetal life, including, in his words, inwardness, connectedness and symbiosis, detoxification, whole system fine-tuning, recycling, photovoltaic power, a global atmosphere-based energy economy, nanotechnology, and the maintenance of biological diversity as a repository of plant heritage. So before returning to the vegetal future of Aldiss's Hothouse, it is worth considering what critics have said of the connections between science fiction and environmental sustainability. Scholarly studies of the ecological implications of sci-fi appear relatively plentiful in the fields of eco-criticism and environmental design. Troiani in 2012 examined the potential of post-apocalyptic ecological sci-fi novels and films to inspire sustainable architectural design. She concludes that rather than an impractical, fanciful, or outlandish genre, sci-fi can reveal ecological architecture pathways for future energy use through its appeal to the human imagination. Eric Otto and Andrew Wilkinson describe the emphasis within green discourse on technological rationality. In their study of time travel narratives, the authors argue that sci-fi allows the reader to call into question the mechanistic worldview of technological utopianism, encouraging sociocultural transformation of the kind that environmental sustainability requires today. Sci-fi narratives encourage discussion of environmental crises not only in terms of technical solutions, but also through human behaviors and societal norms. And in an early eco-critical study, Patrick Murphy characterized the genre as, quote, nature-oriented literature, end quote, that enables critical thinking necessary to link present actions and decisions to the future. However, there appear to be few studies that examine the potential contribution of sci-fi to understanding human relations to the vegetal realm, including matters of ethics, conservation, species loss, and botanical futures. So in Hothouse, the tribespeople Gren, Poily, Veggie, May, and others take refuge in the canopy of a gargantuan immortal banyan tree blanketing the illuminated side of the earth. On first impression, the banyan mothership evokes the Yggdrasil of the 13th century poetic Edda, the immense tree that bridges the 9 worlds of Norse cosmology. A highly adaptive and intelligent plant system, the banyan is, quote, the longest lived organism ever to flourish on this little world. Aldiss goes on to describe the evolutionary means by which the banyan achieved supremacy. On this continent, the banyan, thriving in the heat and using its complex system of self-rooting branches, gradually established ascendancy over other species. Under pressure, it evolved and adapted, each banyan spread out farther and farther, sometimes doubling back on itself for safety. Always it grew higher and crept wider, protecting its parent stem as its rivals multiplied, dropping down trunk after trunk, throwing out branch after branch, until at last it learnt the trick of growing into its neighbor banyan, forming a thicket against which no other tree could survive. Their complexity became unrivaled, their immortality established. So Aldiss's reference to the banyan's complex system of self-rooting branches and the ensuing description of the tree's intentionality, behavior, and learning echoes Charles Darwin's theory of plant root intelligence. At the end of The Power of Movement in Plants, Darwin's text from 1880, he invokes the similarities between plant and animal movements and postulates that the plant brain lies in the root tip or radicle, the part of a plant embryo that becomes the primary root. And in a much quoted passage, Darwin makes this plant root hypothesis evident. He says, it is hardly an exaggeration to say that the tip of the radicle acts like the brain of one of the lower animals, the brain being seated within the anterior end of the body, receiving impressions from the sense organs and directing several movements. So Darwin placed this contention at the end of the treatise, aware that such a statement would garner negative responses from biologists like Julius von Sachs, committed to zoological paradigms of intelligence. As this figure on the left shows, Darwin figured the plant as a kind of upside-down animal with the plant brain in the soil, and its reproductive organs and waste disposal mechanisms, its flowering parts and the stomata of its leaves in the air. His prescient intimations have markedly influenced the development of new understandings of plant capacities. So an example is a recent study indicating that plant cells and human neurons share more characteristics in common than scientists previously recognized. And the biologist Anthony Trewavas uses this clever term, mindless mastery, to signify the specific intelligence of plants despite their obvious lack of brains and neurons. And Trewavas says, imaginative construction of situations in which plant choice and intention can be tested are now providing revelations. So there's more empirical evidence for Darwin's assertions in the late 1800s. So it's quite an exciting time. In Hothouse, the root brain hypothesis surfaces in the description of burner plants, translucent seed casings who exploit fire as a method of self-defense in the perilous high strata of the banyan canopy. And Aldiss says here about the Burnhams, here in the tips, relying on that sun for its strange method of defense, the Burnen ruled among stationary plants. Already its sensitive roots told it that intruders were near. And so there's this sense, on one hand, for the plants as stationary, as fixed in their position, but on the other hand, as having these sensitive roots that receive information about their environment and communicate it to the plant. So Lily Yo, who is the leader of the tribe in this instance from the novel, disarms the Burnen by casting a shadow on their fire-brewing urns. In response, the plants demonstrate effective states. So, and Aldiss continues, quote, as if realizing that this ruined its method of defense, the plant drooped in the shade, a picture of vegetal dejection with its flowers and its urns hanging limply. So not only is the plant intelligent, but it has the capacity to experience emotion. But as the instance of the sucker bird indicates, Aldiss does not so wholeheartedly bestow intelligence to all the plants of this perpetually illuminated world, and many of his creatures, despite exhibiting behavior, learning, emotions, sentience, and so forth, are depicted as automatons who voraciously accrete biomass. So with the sucker bird, we're told, being of vegetable origin, it had little intelligence and only a rudimentary nervous system. What it lacked in this respect, it made up for in bulk and longevity. So once again, downplaying the intelligence of the plant world and sort of foregrounding this bulking, this capacity for plants to accrue physical mass. Whereas these plants of Hothouse cannot speak, they lack the capacity of address. There is the sentient morel, which is a charismatic, talkative fungus who colonizes the male tribesman Gren's brain, directing and at times manipulating him through the course of the narrative's second half. This morel is a very important figure. Aldiss states that in this age of vegetables, plants specialized in size while remaining brainless. The morel fungus, however, had specialized in intelligence, the sharp and limited intelligence of the jungle. And I think that in this morel, the figure of the morel, is quite a lot to be said about our relationships to the plant world, as I'll explain shortly. So returning to the theme of the world in 2050, I'd like to reflect briefly on the vegetal lessons of Hothouse, grounded perhaps in the qualities articulated by Martyr and McKenna: autopoiesis, inwardness, brainlessness, freedom from constructs of past, present, and future, although research does indicate that plants can remember events and adapt their behaviors accordingly. It is the prominence of this intelligent morel in Hothouse that I think problematizes our assignation of intelligence to certain categories of life over others. At the risk of upending my own argument, I want to suggest that to privilege a plant-like future is to swing the pendulum of speciesism away from the vegetable and toward other myriad biological forms that make life on Earth possible. So this privileging of the vegetal just creates another kind of hierarchy. To this effect, at the end of the novel, an integrated post-human vision of the future emerges, in which the former distinctions between life, those that we know, disintegrate in the new world. And I'll quote Aldiss: "Were the tummy bellies vegetable or human? Are the sharp furs human or animal? And the creatures of the hothouse world, these traversers, the killer willows in no man's land, the stalkers that seed like plants and migrate like birds, how do they stand under the old classifications?" End quote. Aldiss is suggesting here that a plant-like future will also be fungi-like, bacteria-like, and yes, mammal, bird, and human-like. This is a future in which nature in its wholeness, rather than its particular forms, is recognized for intelligence and sentience. Embracing an integrated vision of life is not to dismiss the lessons presented to us through close attention to and conscientious participation in the botanical world. To receive the knowledge of plants requires a kind of openness to vegetal being, intimated but not fully manifested in Hothouse. The dystopian vegetal future of the novel is plagued by warlike defensiveness against plant-animal hybrids, rather than the harmonious states of dynamic exchange possible on a planet we inhabit today. What's more, despite their dominance and sentience, the vegetal creatures are rendered as mindless, though not in Darwin or Trewavis's root brain terms. Plant life is unthinking, mechanistic, menacing, and consumed with growth, yet at the same time exhibits intelligence and emotional states and other qualities we would attribute to intelligent life. As eco-critics point out, the value of sci-fi for sustainability lies in its facilitation of critical thinking and prompting of the imagination towards new possibilities. Hothouse leads us back to a future in the extraordinary flora and fauna, fungi, and microorganismic life in which we are already immersed on an everyday basis, and which occupies our bodies, as posthumanist scholars like Donna Haraway have emphasized. The vegetal creatures of Hothouse remind us that plants already dominate the world, accounting for 99% of the Earth's biomass, and rather than expelling us to the margins of existence, these plants lovingly provide everything we need for survival. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing any comments or thoughts you'd have on vegetal intelligence and the botanical future of the Earth. Thank you.